The Vel'tari Compact had survived for 300 years by never once acting in haste. Every fleet movement was debated. Every border skirmish was studied for a decade before doctrine changed. The Compact's 12 founding species had built something they were proud of. A civilization that had not fought a war of true extinction in 3 centuries because it had learned, above all else, to be careful. Commander HFY had grown up believing that caution was the highest virtue a species could have. She had graduated top of her class at the 2nd Perimeter War College by writing a thesis on exactly that. Restraint as Strategy: Why the Compact Has Never Lost a World. She would spend the rest of her life wishing she had never written it. The Krythan Swarm did not arrive with an ultimatum. It did not arrive with a fleet that could be measured, catalogued, and debated over in committee. It arrived the way a wildfire arrives, sudden, total, and utterly indifferent to whatever plans stood in its way. The first colony to fall was Ostrine Reach, a mining outpost of 11,000 souls on the Compact's outer rim. The distress signal lasted 4 minutes before it cut to static. By the time a scout ship arrived to investigate, there was nothing left to investigate. Not wreckage, not bodies, just an empty system and rock that had been stripped of every scrap of processed metal, as if some vast machine had passed through and consumed the very idea of the colony. "It's not war," the scout's captain reported, voice shaking on the recording. "It's digestion." The Compact Council convened. They debated for 6 days. By the time they voted to authorize a defensive mobilization, 4 more systems had gone dark. HFY was given command of 2nd Perimeter Fortress 18 months later, the linchpin of the Compact's entire outer defense network, built over 40 years, crewed by nearly 200,000 soldiers and engineers, ringed by more firepower than any single point in Compact space had ever held. It fell in 11 hours. She would remember every minute of it for the rest of her life. The Swarm did not attack the way a fleet attacks. There was no opening bombardment, no probing skirmish to test defenses. One moment, the sensor net showed empty space. The next, it showed everything, millions of individual contacts, small and fast and utterly without pattern, pouring through a rift point that the Compact's finest scientists had insisted did not exist in that sector. "Commander, our defense grid can't lock targeting solutions," an officer reported. "There are too many contacts. They're not moving like ships. They're moving like a swarm of insects." That was the last coherent report HFY received from that station. 14 minutes later, the officer who had made it was dead, along with everyone else on that deck. The fortress had shields rated to withstand a full Compact battle fleet's opening barrage. The Swarm did not bombard the shields. It touched them, and small biomechanical growths began spreading across the hull like frost across glass. And within an hour, systems the Compact's engineers swore were impenetrable had holes chewed clean through them. HFY gave the evacuation order at hour 9. Fewer than 12,000 people made it off 2nd Perimeter alive. She sat in the command chair of her flagship, watching the fortress die on the display. And for the first time in her career, she understood that caution, the very virtue she had built her life around, meant nothing to an enemy that simply did not stop to think. "Nothing stands between the Swarm and core world now," her adjutant said quietly. "Nothing except the emergency reserve fleet, and Commander, that fleet cannot hold, not against this." HFY's adjutant hesitated before continuing. "There is one option the Council has been avoiding raising for 2 weeks. The humans, Commander. Their space borders our outer territories. A distress beacon reached them 8 days ago, before 2nd Perimeter fell. Nobody expected a response. They're a single-system species. They've barely signed their first interstellar treaties. They have no obligation to us at all." Ashai laughed, and there was no humor anywhere in the sound. So the Council's plan, after 300 years of careful strategy, is to hope that children answer a phone call meant for adults. The reply arrived faster than anything the Compact's own bureaucracy had ever managed to produce. "This is Fleet Admiral Renata Cross, Seoul Defense Coalition. We received your distress call. We are already moving. ETA to your position 6 days. Hold on." 6 days. Not 6 weeks of deliberation. Not 6 months to construct new ships or convene an emergency vote. 6 days. And the message made clear the fleet was already underway before the reply had even finished transmitting. The Compact Council, gathered in emergency session, treated the message with something between disbelief and quiet horror. "They cannot be serious," said Council Elder Fassick, the oldest voice in the chamber. "Our own intelligence estimates place the entire human military at fewer than 200 capital-grade warships total across their whole species. The swarm fields thousands. This is not aid. This is a funeral procession." "Then why send it?" Ashai asked, standing before the council for the first time as a fortress commander with no fortress left to command. "Why mobilize in hours when we spent weeks debating whether to even ask?" Nobody in that chamber had an answer. Ashai stared at the human message a long time after the session ended, alone in her quarters, turning the words over as if they were an artifact from an alien dig site, which, in a sense, they were. "We are already moving. Hold on." Not "we will consider your request." Not "our council will vote." Just movement, immediate and unhesitating, from a species with every rational reason to stay home. "Either they are fools," she said quietly to the empty room, "or they know something about war that we forgot a very long time ago." The 6 days before the human fleet's arrival were the longest of Ashai's life. The swarm did not pause to consolidate its gains after second perimeter fell. It kept moving, methodical and hungry, swallowing 3 more outposts in the days that followed. Compact strategists tried desperately to predict its path, but the swarm's movement defied every model they built. "It's not being directed by strategy," one exhausted analyst reported. "We think it might genuinely be closer to an organism responding to stimulus than a military force executing a campaign. It doesn't retreat. It doesn't feint. It doesn't negotiate. It only consumes." Nobody could answer how the humans intended to stop something that wasn't playing by the rules of war at all. Not until the 6th day, when the rift point at the edge of Core World's system shimmered, and the sensor net picked up the first human contacts. Ashai had expected, despite everything, something that at least resembled a compact fleet. Elegant capital ships, careful formations, the visual language of a civilization that took war seriously enough to make it beautiful. What came through the rift instead looked like a fist. Human ships did not hold compact-style defensive formations. There was no elegant crescent, no layered picket line. They came through in fast, aggressive wedges, engines already burning hot, weapons already charged, computers already running 100 different attack solutions before the ships had even fully cleared the rift point. At the head of the formation was a battlecruiser scarred with the marks of older battles, its hull painted with a name in human script: Fury of the Veil. A voice crackled onto every open channel in the sector, calm, measured, utterly unshaken by the scale of what was coming. "Commander Voren, this is Admiral Cross. We're here. Get your people back to Core World and dig in. We'll handle the front line." Ashai stared at the tactical display, at the sheer imbalance of the numbers glowing in front of her. "Admiral, you have perhaps 1/10 of the ships the swarm is fielding in this sector alone. This is not reinforcement. This is annihilation." There was a pause, not of hesitation, Ashai would realize later, but of someone choosing their words with care. "Commander," Cross said, almost gently,
You've been fighting a war of addition. More ships, more shielding, more distance between yourselves and the enemy. The swarm doesn't care about your math. It just keeps coming until something breaks. Then what does your math look like, Admiral? We don't do math, Cross replied. We do leverage.
The human fleet did not attempt to match the swarm ship for ship. It did not spread out to defend territory the way 300 years of compact doctrine demanded. Instead, it drove directly into the densest part of the Krythan Formation, a maneuver so contrary to every principle of survivable warfare that for a full 10 seconds, nobody on HFY's bridge said a word. They're flying straight into the heart of it, her tactical officer finally managed. Commander, that's not an attack pattern. That's suicide. HFY watched, unable to look away, as a third of the human fleet detonated something woven directly into their own drive cores. A cascading electromagnetic pulse the Compact had never developed, because no sane military doctrine would ever justify sacrificing your own ships to power a single devastating strike. The pulse tore through the swarm's formation like lightning through water. "They're killing their own ships on purpose," her adjutant whispered, horror plain in her voice. "No," HFY said slowly, watching the display reshape itself in real time, watching the swarm's perfect, terrifying coordination begin to fracture. "Look, really look. The swarm was never a fleet in the way we understood fleets. It's a hive, one mind distributed across thousands of bodies, all moving as a single will. Cut the mind off from its body, even for a moment." On the display, without central coordination guiding it, the Krythan Swarm did not regroup. It began attacking itself. Ships that had moved in perfect unison seconds earlier collided, fired on one another, tore into their own formation with the same mindless hunger they had once directed outward. "That's insane," her adjutant breathed. "That," HFY said, feeling something dangerously close to hope, "is brilliant." It was not a clean victory. Nothing about it was clean. HFY watched the tactical display as human ships with crews, with names, with people who had left a species that owed the Compact nothing and come anyway, burned and died in the crossfire of their own gambit. The fury of the Veil itself took a direct hit at the height of the engagement, its shields failing entirely for nearly 90 seconds, and HFY found herself gripping the arms of her command chair so hard her knuckles ached, willing a ship crewed by strangers not to die. It did not die. It limped, scorched and venting atmosphere from 3 decks, but it held. By the time what remained of the Compact's own battered fleet moved in to finish the engagement, the Krythan Swarm had simply unraveled. A hive mind severed from its limbs, thousands of vessels drifting without purpose, easy work for forces that only hours earlier had believed the war already lost. Admiral Cross's ship drifted into dock at Core World 3 days after the battle ended, hull scorched black, a third of her fleet gone. HFY met her at the airlock personally. "You lost a third of your fleet in 6 days for a species you had never met. Why?" Cross looked at her for a long moment. "Because you asked," she said. "That's how it's supposed to work." HFY had spent her whole life being taught that caution was the highest virtue a civilization could hold. She had spent 1 week relearning, at terrible cost, what it meant to answer a call for help without first calculating whether the cost was worth paying. The treaty signed months later did not read like a standard defense pact. In the end, the Compact borrowed the human word instead of inventing their own. Alliance. Not a carefully bounded clause, but a single commitment. If one of us calls, the other comes. You stand beside them, and you never, ever let go.